At 9:16 p.m. on June 24, 1990, Gayle King walked into her own bedroom and found her husband naked with another woman. And what makes that detail remarkable is not just that she still remembers the exact minute more than 3 decades later. It is that she remembers the time with absolute precision while claiming she can barely remember the other woman's name. The date stayed. The time stayed. The woman disappeared from the story entirely. And once you hear that, you start looking back at every year of that marriage differently and wondering exactly how long the gap existed between what was being said and what was actually true. In 1982, Gayle King was 28 years old and still years away from becoming one of the most recognizable faces in American television. She was working in local broadcasting at a time when women in television, especially black women, fought for every inch of visibility. Every segment mattered. Every appearance mattered. Every mistake mattered more if you looked like her. She was not wealthy. She was not famous. She was building a life in real time. And that matters because when she met William Bumpus, she believed she had found someone who understood ambition the same way she did. He was a lawyer, educated, polished, stable, the kind of man who seemed capable of building a future instead of interrupting one. They married in 1982, and for a while, the marriage looked exactly the way successful marriages are supposed to look from the outside. 2 careers, 2 children, a daughter, Kirby, a son, William Jr., a house full of schedules and obligations, and routines that only function when at least one person commits themselves completely to holding everything together. That person was Gayle. She was waking up before sunrise for television, coming home to raise children, managing a household, showing up at school events, keeping the emotional temperature of the family stable while trying to build a career in an industry that rewards visibility and punishes exhaustion. And somewhere inside that structure, a quiet imbalance formed. He had a profession. She had responsibilities layered on top of responsibilities. That distinction matters, because by the late 1980s, Gayle King's career had started moving into another category entirely. Producers noticed her presence on camera. Audiences trusted her. And behind the scenes, her friendship with Oprah Winfrey had already become one of the defining relationships of her life. The 2 women met in Baltimore in 1976 while working at a television station. And Oprah later described Gayle as the kind of person who shows up when things become difficult, not just when things are easy, which in retrospect reads differently, because while Gayle was becoming more visible publicly, there are signs that her private life was becoming harder to hold together. Not dramatic signs, not tabloid signs, no public meltdowns, no interviews, no accusations. Gayle King has always been extraordinarily controlled with language. That word matters. Controlled, and controlled is exactly how someone sounds when they are protecting their children while their personal life collapses. Privately, by 1989, the couple had been married nearly 8 years. 2 children, careers, stability. Anyone looking at the marriage from the outside would have assumed they had figured it out, but appearances are often just rehearsed versions of reality. And if you have ever been on the receiving end of carefully managed language from someone who has already emotionally left a relationship, you understand precisely how difficult it becomes to identify the moment everything changed. Then came June 24, 1990. At exactly 9:16 p.m., Gayle King walked into her bedroom and found her husband in bed with another woman. Not a rumor, not suspicion, not a phone call from a friend. She saw it herself, in her home, in her bed, in the place that was supposed to represent safety. That detail lands entirely on its own, because affairs already involve deception. But bringing another person into the marital home changes the betrayal into something territorial, deliberate, intimate, in the cruelest possible way. He did not choose distance, he chose proximity. And according to accounts from people close to the situation, the affair had not begun that night. The affair already existed. June 24th was simply the night Gayle saw the truth directly for the first time. That sequence is deliberate. The marriage did not collapse in one evening. The illusion collapsed in one evening. Years later, in a Vanity Fair interview, Gayle was asked which living person she despised most, and she answered with a sentence that became famous because of how carefully constructed it was. "I do not like to give advice, because recipients seldom welcome it. But I can tell you this, I would not choose a man who cheated on me with another woman in my own home while my children were asleep." Then she added the line people never forgot. "I am not bitter. I am better, but I can remember the date, June 24th, 1990, and the time 9:16 p.m. The repetition matters. Date, time, date, time. That wording was not accidental. It was chosen by someone who had decades to decide exactly how she wanted to frame the worst moment of her life, and notice what she excluded. She did not obsess over the other woman publicly. She did not build her identity around humiliation. She centered the decision her husband made. That is not the language of someone trying to create spectacle. That is the language of someone documenting evidence. After that night, Gayle did something many people never understand until they experience betrayal personally. She tried to save the marriage. And that part of the story is often the hardest to talk about honestly, because outsiders always imagine betrayal creates immediate clarity. It usually does not, especially when children are involved. She went to counseling. She sat beside the man who betrayed her and tried to rebuild something functional for the sake of her family. And for 3 years, from 1990 until 1993, she continued doing what she had always done, working, parenting, smiling on camera, maintaining composure publicly, while privately carrying knowledge she could never unknow. 3 years, that number, matters, because people often talk about infidelity as a moment, but the real damage usually happens afterward. In the repetition, in the forced normalcy, in lying beside someone whose choices permanently altered the emotional architecture of your home. If you have ever attempted to continue a relationship after trust collapsed completely, you understand how ordinary routines suddenly become impossible. Walking into the bedroom changes, silence changes, every late arrival changes, and according to Gayle's own descriptions years later, the counseling failed because the issue was larger than communication. Trust had shattered. Specifically, trust inside the home itself. That is different. In 1993, after 11 years of marriage, Gayle King filed for divorce. No massive celebrity settlement, no billion-dollar assets, no empire to divide. At that point, she was still a broadcaster building her future in real time while raising 2 children, and this is where the financial reality of the story becomes important, because the paper trail usually reveals intention more honestly than public statements ever do. After the divorce, Gayle did not walk away with generational wealth. She walked away with responsibility, 2 children, a demanding career, and the obligation to continue functioning no matter what emotional cost existed underneath the surface. That is the part people often underestimate about women in high-visibility careers during that era. Television did not pause for emotional devastation. Audiences expected consistency. Producers expected professionalism. The camera expected composure every morning. Whether your private life survived the night before or not. And Gayle gave them exactly that. The world never saw her break. Publicly, that silence became its own form of power. She never wrote a revenge Memoir. Never launched public attacks, never turned interviews into punishment, and when someone remains that restrained for decades, every word they eventually choose carries more weight, because restraint creates credibility. Years later, when Gayle revisited the story publicly, she described herself very carefully. "I was married to a cheater. Simple, direct, finished." Then she said something even more revealing. "I am healed. I worked it out. I am not bitter." Again, the wording matters. Not bitter, better. That contrast is deliberate, because while William Bumpus disappeared from the public imagination almost entirely, Gayle King became larger every single year. After the divorce, that is the reversal at the center of this story. The woman who seemed abandoned ultimately became the person whose life expanded. She continued building her career until she became one of the defining faces of American morning television. She interviewed presidents, athletes, CEOs, global figures. She became one of the most trusted interviewers in media, and she did all of it without the man she originally believed would stand beside her. Every promotion after 1993 belonged entirely to her. Every contract, every opportunity, every achievement earned. After the collapse, that sequence is not accidental. Then, 26 years after the affair, something happened almost nobody expected. In 2016, William Bumpus publicly apologized 26 years later. His statement read, "I have been haunted with this life-altering choice. Though I have dealt with this privately, I publicly apologize for the major transgression that dramatically changed all of our lives." Haunted. Life-altering. Major transgression. Those are legalistic words. Careful words. Words selected slowly.